Okay. Hi everyone. We're getting ready to start in 7 minutes. So hello to everyone who's watching the stream. I'm looking at it on Facebook now. Okay. 7 minutes. So I'm gonna put up the banner.
Oh, we could hear the echo. I think that when you are looking on Facebook, we heard you twice.
Oh, okay. You just probably
just
want to mute your
mute
your mic. I'm gonna run the trailer. Okay, here's our trailer. Okay. So welcome to everyone joining us. Mong, you can do some welcomes too.
Yeah, welcome to the new episode on our Global Voices Insights. We'll be starting shortly.
Okay. Oh, I should mention that we have the private chat. First, the guests can all see. So we can leave messages for each other there. All right, great. Comments. Oh, okay. Okay, we'll be starting in 4 minutes.
So we can already post comments, likes on different platforms if you're looking. You're watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch.
Great. 3 minutes to go. Three minutes to go. Three minutes to go. Okay, yeah, I'm hearing echoes from there.
Right.
Yeah, Philip, once we start, we'll mute our mics. So. Okay, yeah, I'm hearing echoes from there.
Right. I'm muting.
Yeah. Great. 2 minutes. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to start the countdown. Okay. You're live, Mom.
Mabuhay! Welcome to a new episode in our Global Voices Insights series of virtual conversations. Our topic, Milk Tea Alliance, Thailand, Taiwan, and Hong Kong's unified fight for democracy. I am Mong Palatino, the Southeast Asia editor of Global Voices. I'd like to greet everyone who's watching the live stream on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch. Greetings also to those who will be watching the recording later. We will discuss the Milk Tea Alliance and the impact of this transnational youth protest movement in East Asia and beyond, with experts from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Thailand, as well as with other members of the Global Voices community. We hope to answer these questions. Why the name Milk Tea Alliance? How did it start? What is it actually? How did it spread across the region? Why are Chinese trolls targeting it? And what are its prospects this year? To help us answer these questions, we invited panelists from independent media outlets, partners, and friends of Global Voices. From Thailand, we will have Anna Lawatana Trakul, English language assistant editor for Patriot, a Bangkok-based online newspaper focusing on human rights, which has been covering the 2020 pro-democracy protest in Thailand. Next, we will have Oiwan Lam, Global Voices regional editor for Northeast Asia. Oiwan is a media activist based in Hong Kong, where she has founded a number of citizen media initiatives, including inmediahk.net and factchecklab.org. She also teaches a course on new media and society under the Global Communications Program in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. From Taiwan, we will have Brian Yu, one of the founding editors of New Bloom magazine. He was the Democracy and Human Rights Service Fellow at the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy from 2017 to 2018. Finally, we will have Darika Bamrungchok, Digital Rights Manager at Engage Media, based in Bangkok. She oversees and leads digital rights and digital safety initiatives in Thailand and the Mekong region. So for our instructions to our viewers during the webinar, you can post questions to our panelists wherever you are watching. You will be able to see these questions and comments from YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch. So let's start brewing the discussion about the Milk Tea Alliance. So let's welcome our first speaker from Thailand. Anna, you have the floor.
Hello, I'm Anna, and I'm going to be talking about the Milk Tea Alliance and how it started, and also how it the way it manifests during the pro-democracy protest in 2020. I'm going to put a slide up. Okay. So let's start with how the multi-alliance began. It sort of start with what I would call kind of an internet flame war. So in April of 2020, there's an actor called Wachiravit Shivaari, and he's a Thai actor who was he was starring in a boys love series, and he had quite a lot of Chinese fans, and he retweeted a tweet that happens to refer to Hong Kong as a country. So his Chinese fans got really angry, and at one point he had to apologize to them. But then there is a group of Chinese fans that went through his girlfriend's Instagram and found this photo where she was replying to a friend's comment saying that she was kind of like saying that she's dressing like a Taiwanese girl. And there was also a comment on the same picture where Wachiravit told his girlfriend that she looks like a Chinese girl, and she kind of said what in sort of like actually sort of in a cute way, but it got misinterpreted by Wachiravit's group of Chinese fans that like into sounding like she was angry at being told she looks like a Chinese girl. And so then this whole thing kind of spiraled into an argument between Thai Twitter users and Chinese users and some internet trolls and bots, and then users from Hong Kong and Taiwan also started to join in, and it was kind of a storm of memes and back and forth arguments, in which at one point that there are some Chinese people who started attacking the Thai government because they somehow think that Thai people would be offended by that. But at that point, in April, it was kind of a point where young Thai people have already started to protest against the government. So they were kind of trolling a little bit, and then by a kind of agreeing with the comments and spin the criticism back at the Chinese users, and then you get users from Hong Kong and Taiwan users joining in. I'm going to try to mostly talk about Thailand because I think our panelists from Hong Kong and Taiwan will be able to talk about what's going on in their parts better than I can. I want to talk about how mostly the multi-alliance in Thailand is an online solidarity movement because it happens at the same time as the pro-democracy protests that took up most of 2020. And it from the Thai point of view, it is mostly about people using social media platforms to raise awareness about issues in each other's countries and showing support for the movement that's happening in each of the three countries. So I'm showing some of the tweets from people from Taiwan and people from Hong Kong, as well as activist Joshua Wong, who have been expressing support for the Thai protesters and were calling attention to the police crackdowns on the protests in October and November of last year. And they were making arts and trending hashtags and sharing infographics and photos and trying to call attention to, at that time, what was happening in Thailand at a point when the state authorities have just used water cannon trucks and tear gas against unarmed protesters and arrested several of the leaders. And so because this happened when Joshua Wong was detained, so when he was detained in November, the Thai Twitter users kind of returned the favor. So they were trending the Stand with Joshua Wong hashtags, and they were making arts, and they were sharing information, and they were trying to get as many people as possible to know what was happening in Hong Kong. And same goes with the case of the 12 Hong Kong young people who were arrested in the late last year. So you can see that what started out with memes and shitposting and internet trolling has become a way of rallying people to stand with each other at a time when Thailand, Taiwan, and Hong Kong are going through this political struggle and this demand for democratic reforms.
Anna, do you want to share your screen?
I am sharing my screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think you have to put it up. I am sharing my screen. You have to. Someone has to put it up on the. Is it on the thing? Can you see? Can you see it now? Is this working?
Not yet.
Can I stop sharing and try again? I think it might.
Yes, you can try again.
Okay.
Because we weren't seeing your graphics.
Is this working now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I didn't realize that people weren't seeing the slide. So I'm going to go back up a bit.
Yeah.
So
and you
I'm
have to quickly summarize the points because
yeah. I'm just showing
to the next speaker.
Yeah, I'm just showing how people on Twitter were kind of raising awareness about what's going on in each of the countries. So I've screen capped some tweets that are people from Hong Kong talking about the protests in Thailand, and then Thai protesters talking about Joshua Wong's arrest and the other activists who were arrested in Hong Kong. I'm just going to proceed to how it actually what the manifestation of the multi-alliance that I've seen covering the pro-democracy protests. So this picture is from a protest in September when people were gathering in Old Town, Bangkok, kind of next to the Grand Palace. And so you can see that in this picture, they were also waving the flag for the movement in Taiwan and in Hong Kong, kind of in the center of the picture. And this is also from another protest in November, where you could also see that they were flying these flags, and there are signs saying anti-one China and multi-alliance, just kind of everywhere in these protests. But also I want to show you. This is actually from one of the police crackdowns in October, and I'm showing this picture because I want to show you how Thai protesters have actually learned from Hong Kong, because before the 16 October protest, there were infographics that were being made and shared on social media with information on how you could protect yourselves when you go to protest, and it's very clearly taken from advice from Hong Kong protesters. This is another protest on the next day. So you can see that they are using umbrellas as shields, and they are wearing hard hats and goggles, as well as the one on 18th of October. And I'm just showing this picture. This is from a march to a government house, so you could actually see how the protesters are dressing and the protective gears that they have on. So just to conclude a little bit, I think it's because we are kind of going through a situation where we don't have very big protests so often anymore. So I feel like it remains to be seen how the multi-alliance is going to develop in the future. And I'm just going to hand off to our next speaker. Okay.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for mentioning that the multi-alliance is an online solidarity movement, and it emerged to raise awareness about several issues in Thailand because it coincided with the rise of the pro-democracy movement in Thailand. And my observation from here in Manila, it emerged at the intersection of popular culture, because you mentioned about the Thai actor, digital rights, and geopolitics. So that's interesting from the point of view of someone who is monitoring the situation in Thailand. Anyway, before our next speaker, I'd like to mention that we have viewers from Timor-Leste, Belarus, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. So greetings to all our viewers. You can watch us live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So from Thailand, we'll proceed to the next flavor of the Milk Tea Alliance webinar. This one from Hong Kong, our very own Oy Wan Lam from Global Voices.
Okay,
Oy Wan, you have the floor.
Yeah. So I would like to talk about the context of the multi-alliance with reference to the rise of China's random nationalism. This is a term which has been used by academics to describe the organization and emotional structure of the new generation of Chinese online patriots. The next one, let me see. Can you? Okay. So let's take a look at who are the Chinese online patriots and the driving force behind their action. So according to researches done by both overseas scholars like Liu Haihong in that book, as well as mainland Chinese official media outlet, majority of those who have joined the online expedition to overseas social media were born after 1990s, and they are active members of online community, in particular, online fans clubs of either popular star or subculture, like Japanese boy love comic. This generation is brought up in post-Tiananmen era, when patriot education was adopted as a means to maintain political stability in China. The pedagogy stresses the pain and suffering that China has gone through since Qing dynasty and places China in an antagonistic relation with other countries. One most well-known example that represents China's state-directed nationalistic narrative in this period is the book China Can Say No. So you can see in the screen. It's written by leftist nationalist Song Qiang, among others. The book expresses an aspiration of a strong China that can counter the U.S. hegemony. So in the book cover, you can see that the U.S. is portrayed as a global police who set international rules. But at the same time, the book post-1990s is also China's first internet generation. They have been exposed to a diverse popular culture like Japanese comics, American and Korean drama, online game, Cantonese pop, and etc. Actually, between 2002 and 2004, I was taking my MPhil in sociology in Beijing. During that time, I worked as a research assistant on a research on China online fan club. One of the research focus was on how popular singers perform patriotism on stage and how their fans react to their performance. So I joined Taiwanese singer J. Chow's fans club in Beijing and attend many of their activities for 2 years. At that time, there were already signs that Chinese fans' love for their idols will intertwine with patriotic expression. For example, the fans will go crazy when the singer from Taiwan or Hong Kong express that they share the same root or bloodline with their fans. But at the same time, artists' patriotic performance was more a market strategy at that time. Things have changed after 10 years. Under the new leadership of Xi Jinping, ideological struggle has become the top priority for maintaining political stability. So in 2013, China introduced 7 red lines for independent internet celebrities, demanding them to promote positive energy online. On the same year, Beijing launched the rumor law to suppress online information source. By now, Chinese social media is flooded with positive narrative about China and negative narrative about other countries. And Beijing also has strengthened its censorship on TV and movie. Majority of the dramas have to include patriotic element in order to get an approval from the censor. A typical example of such kind of patriotic movie is Wolf Warrior. Its punchline, whoever offended China will be eliminated no matter how far they are. This has become a punchline for online patriots as well. In 2016, state and party-affiliated media outlets were forced to pledge their loyalty to the party, and in many cases, party officials have taken control over the newsroom. Around the same time, singers and artists from Hong Kong and Taiwan were also forced to perform patriotism on social media if they want to enter the China market. For example, they have to help spreading state propaganda such as Chinese position in the territorial dispute in South China Sea. The Communist Youth League has started actively appropriate elements of popular culture in promoting patriotism. In 2017, the League opened its official account on Bilibili, a very popular video platform among youth. From its official account banner, you can see that Japanese-style comic has become a crucial element in Youth League's image. By 2018, majority of the internet corporate has established party branch. Against such background, the Chinese Patriot fans organized their first expedition to Facebook in 2016 after Taiwan won the Taiwan presidential election. The expedition was organized by an online football fans community, originally based in a forum called Diba. Members of the community was originally referred to as 屌丝, meaning pathetic losers. Before 2016, the community of 屌丝 enjoyed picking fights with other online football fans community inside China, and they always won. Their punchline is Diba will always rap out their enemies in their expedition. So after 2016, the title of Diba's member has shifted from the vulgar term 屌丝 to tiny pain. It means online patriots. In the name of Diba, the tiny pains have organized expeditions to Sweden embassy's Facebook in 2018 and to pick fight with Hong Kong protesters in 2019. So it's not the first time that they have such expedition. They always have that. So in addition to expedition, the tiny pinks also like attacking celebrities' political incorrect acts. There are countless incidents, and the most famous one took place in 2016. A 16-year-old Taiwanese singer, Zhou Zhiyu, was forced to apologize for carrying a Taiwanese flag in TV show broadcast in Taiwan. And more recently, prominent Chinese writer Fang Fang was labeled as traitor for her Wuhan diary about COVID-19 outbreak last year. So one character of fans culture, the Chinese fan culture, is that they love to pick fights with their idol's competitor. Their love for their idols will turn into hatred of either their idol's competitor or their idol's lover, as they will obstruct their fantasy about the idol. So in addition, the fans also have strong expectation that their idols would perform for them. So as patriotism has become the dominant ideology in China, the Chinese fans' love and hate for their idol have a stronger tendency to articulate through nationalistic expression. And they would also expect their idol to perform patriotism. That's why when their idol were being attacked for deviating from official narrative, very often they would be demanded to perform apology, public apology. The expedition to Twitter and Instagram targeting Bryce's lover, girlfriend, is triggered by the fans' love for the Thai actor. So I think just now our speaker had already summed up what's happened. It's all about this girlfriend. They dig up the information about Bright and then found out that she had a super pretty girlfriend, and they become so envious. But when they have to find excuse to bully this girl, and then they found the excuse by through nationalistic expression. So this is something new or something special about Chinese online nationalism. So they decide to teach the Thai girl one China history lesson by using the text Navy, which is the account of that girl. But at the same time, some parties' authorities, such as the Communist Youth League, have also appropriated such sentiment and try to turn China into the netizen's idol, so that they would see China's competitor or whoever ruined China's image as enemies. So, however, such strategy is a double-edged sword. Because if their idol does not perform according to its image, the fans will be disappointed. In the past few years, whenever the Chinese government showed weakness in its diplomatic relation with the US, the tiny pinks would be disappointed and complain about it. So to a certain extent, the performance of China's wolf warrior diplomacy is also driven by the unintended consequence of the state-led fandom nationalism project. So this is the social media crossfire between the Thai and the Chinese netizen. I'll skip this because the crossfire caught Hong Kong protester attention very soon. So as Hong Kong protester has established a global information network during the 2019 protests. After young activists such as Zhou Helen tweeted about the incident, many netizens from Hong Kong and Taiwan joined in the hashtag and memory fight. But because of the crackdown on activists in Hong Kong, now the information network is a kind of disrupt. So message about the nuclear alliance is not as visible as before. Now the hashtag multi-alliance is mainly used for sharing protest news in Southeast Asia and critical comments on China. So I don't know if other countries like Taiwan or overseas Hong Kong will continue to develop the hashtag in the future or not. Yeah, but for me, this is a very distinctive experience because it's the first time that in Southeast Asia, the countries are actually look at each other and learn from each other and try to build alliance rather than just a very simple, because in the past, the dilemma is more about the West and the East, but this is the first time that within the region, we have something like a common project among the civil society. So I'll stop here and then give it to the next.
Thank you, Oiwan. So that is 12 minutes crash course on fandom nationalism, patriotic education, and the ideological struggles waged by the CCP, and its impact on the Milk Tea Alliance and the situation in Hong Kong. So for our viewers, we are thankful for your participation. We have viewers from Australia, Scotland, Uganda, and Italy, and also, of course, from other countries. Please continue to post questions, and we will raise them during the open forum. So from Thailand and Hong Kong, we now proceed to Taiwan. What is the impact of the Milk Tea Alliance, or how do netizens in Taiwan react to the Milk Tea Alliance? So from Taiwan, we'll have Brian.
Thanks for the insightful comments. So I kind of want to actually pick up on this, right? How this is such an interesting phenomenon because it is a connection between Taiwan and Thailand and Hong Kong. And so I think, for example, historically, one has seen a lot of solidarity between Taiwan and Hong Kong because of the shared issue regarding China. And so then, for example, in the last year protests, you had these massive rallies taking place in Taiwan, for example, tens of thousands of people, up to 100,000 protesting in support of protesters in Hong Kong. I think also what is shared between Taiwan and Hong Kong evidently is just language, for example, that one can actually just read the internet discourse in Hong Kong if you're Taiwanese, for example, just because it's, or at least understand it to a great extent because it's also written in Chinese, though no Cantonese. So I think that what is interesting is the Milk Tea Alliance is, as a transnational phenomenon, can be seen as a stand in the region against authoritarianism. It does concern itself with the China issue because it was provoked by these responses by Chinese netizens. And I think that there's this kind of growing observation that there have been increased, I think Chinese nationalism online is increasingly visible in spaces such as Twitter or whatever on different social media networks, even on social media networks that are actually banned within China. And as kind of Oiwan mentioned, for example, there have been past incidents in which, for example, Chinese internet forum users on Diba, Chinese forum, would, for example, jump the Great Firewall of China to, for example, go and attack Taiwanese pro-democracy politicians, such as the president, Tsai Ing-wen, for example, leaving all these kind of hateful comments on her Facebook page, coming after people and trying to dox them and that sort of thing. And I think that it is very reflective of how online spaces now are spaces of political tension in today. And I think it's also just interesting in that sense, the way in which a lot of the Milk Tea Alliance has taken shape is through these kind of different internet memes, through cultural references to this kind of shared culture that many young people on the internet are aware of and share. And the fact that even just the name itself, milk tea, the fact that Taiwan, Thailand, and Hong Kong have shared habits of drinking some form of milk tea, that is also a sign of, let's say, globalization, just because of the fact that different food is available in different places and people are familiar with different cuisines. In Taiwan, we do have Thai restaurants and you have Hong Kong restaurants and that sort of thing. So that allows for the conditions for this to take place. And I think that then what one sees in confronting, I think, Chinese nationalism is this sort of stand of, I think, cosmopolitan democratic values versus regional authoritarianism or just rote nationalism. And I think that is what is so refreshing about that, because online spaces, particularly I think in the past few years that we see with the rise of right-wing populism in different contexts around the world, a lot of it is just filled with this kind of nationalism. And so I think it is a very positive sign seeing this development regionally. But the question then I have is, that I think is also worth discussing, is just then, how does this translate to just beyond solidarity, A? How can it actually translate, for example, to assistance between these places for each other? And second, how does it actually involve, for example, getting to know more about these struggles and learning from each other? For example, in Taiwan, I think a lot of the framing of the milk tea narrative is that, oh, people in the region are becoming aware of this threat of China that Taiwan has historically faced, because Taiwan faces the threat of invasion from China, which would snuff out Taiwan's democratic freedoms. But then, when you look at, for example, protests in Thailand, that is not directly about the China issue. This is a stand against the military regime there, against the monarchy, and so forth by young people. And this is very similar to these different movements one has seen in past years in Taiwan with the Sun Fiber in 2014, or in Hong Kong in 2014 with the Umbrella Movement, and the later on the anti-ELAB movement in the past year. And I think that then the commonality then is that I think particularly a lot of the Milk Tea Alliance, the origin of it can be traced back to this regional interest in Hong Kong, because as this massive uprising among just the largest proportion of the population in modern history participating in protests and having these kind of innovative tactics against the riot police. And so I think then, protesters in Thailand and Taiwan and elsewhere will look at this and see, want to know how to learn from it, how to actually kind of attract global attention. Also, just in terms of, again, concrete tactics with dealing with the police and riot gear and rubber bullets and tear gas and those sorts of things. And so that is, I think, where a lot of the interest in this kind of phenomenon comes from. But the question I often have, particularly from Taiwan, is how aware are people in Taiwan of, let's say, protests in Thailand, what they are about? I think there's still this kind of greater concern with, for example, Hong Kong, and not just kind of situating this in the framework of a kind of shared struggle for democracy that doesn't necessarily just have to do with the China threat, the regional threat to democracies from China, which is part of it, but also not exclusively it. And so I think, for example, in Taiwan, by contrast, the solidarity rallies that have taken place for Thailand have been much smaller, for example, a few hundred people or even a few dozen people. The activists that are organizing here are oftentimes Thai students studying in Taiwan. And you do see, for example, former Sun Fiber Movement leader Chen Wei-ting, for example, did go to some solidarity protests. The New Power Party, which is a third party formed after the Sun Fiber Movement in 2014, was also present at these protests, pointing to that there's a need in the region to stand up for democracy. But then beyond that, it's also telling to me then I think that it doesn't attract this kind of attention from the Taiwanese public writ large. And so I think that maybe points to where there's some limitations to, I think, the transnational framing of it. I think that's something that people could stand to learn from. But I think what's also interesting then is to point to the transnationalism of activists, the solidarity of activists versus responses from the state. I think now particularly we're seeing the rise of protests which are often youth-led. You're dealing with similar threats, so you're wearing masks, for example, to hide your identity because of the threat of digital surveillance and identification. I think also just because of that modern policing technology involves tear gas and batons and so forth. You have adoption of the safety helmets and that sort of thing. And just so people looking at each other, looking at these images, are learning from each other. And I think that particularly Thailand, for example, just people will share these viral images of, for example, bringing the unicorn floats to the front of the protest as a barrier, as a very innovative way of getting attention, but also having a practical means. And I expect to see this pop up in other places actually in the future. For example, Hong Kong, once, let's say, COVID blows over, hopefully, and possibly protests would resume, or just other contexts too, because movements do learn from each other in this way. But then what will happen, I think, from state actors is that they will point to this shared phenomenon and claim that this is a sign of, let's say, a color revolution, that this is all stirred up by foreign forces from abroad. That, for example, in Thailand, you might claim that Hong Kong and Taiwan are intervening there to cause this to happen, or in Taiwan, or in Hong Kong, you'll have to claim that Taiwan or Thailand is involved in stirring up protests. You'll have this attempt by state actors, authoritarian state actors, to blame this on outside forces, pointing to these convergent phenomenon, or how social movements are learning from each other through phenomena such as the Milk Tea Alliance, and claiming that this is not coincidence. I mean, obviously it is not coincidence. It's actually that social movements are learning from each other, that activists are looking to each other, but then this will be used as a means of delegitimizing the movement. And I think it's quite interesting, actually, because there was a story recently in Taiwan in which three Taiwanese men were arrested for circulating Chinese disinformation. So they went to China, were trained in spreading disinformation, came back to Taiwan. They were working as administrators on Diba, the internet forum that came up a few times. And they tried to circulate disinformation about COVID, claiming that Tsai, the president, won through election fraud, but significantly also claiming that Taiwan was involved in stirring up the Milk Tea Alliance. They had false documentation that was a letter purporting to be between Taiwanese and American government officials, saying that we're going to work together to create this milk tea phenomenon online, this kind of false correspondence. And so they were working on behalf of China. This is an attempt to kind of delegitimize the Milk Tea Alliance, to claim that is outside forces. And so that's one example of this kind of thing. I think that probably we will see more of these kind of disinformation efforts in the near future as well, just coming up. But I think that's interesting then, because that points to the challenge of facing the Milk Tea Alliance. This solidarity can be used against us by state actors in that sense. And I think that there will be people that do believe that, because we live in an age in which there's increasing amounts of misinformation and disinformation put out by state actors or online trolls or nationalists or whoever. And there are people that will believe it. And so the question then is what do movements draw from each other? Oftentimes what we draw from each other is legitimacy. And oftentimes we are trying to learn from each other and build connections. But that can also be used against us, for example. You do have activists, for example, coming under fire or being targeted by the regimes for conducting online calls just to learn from activists, or even events such as this. For example, in Singapore, there's an activist, Jalvin Wam, who came under fire for just having a Skype call with Joshua Wong, because wanting to learn from Hong Kong and that sort of thing. And so I think that's kind of the paradox. And I think that's also maybe where the Milk Tea Alliance as a phenomenon would need to consider further to actually kind of have further roots and become more substantial. But I think that I think that maybe we can discover this more in discussion. But I think it's just very it's almost a sign of the time. I think that this kind of online phenomenon for us it's very extraordinary because of the fact that it's kind of the first time we've seen this. But just we live in an increasingly globalized world. I hope that people across the world can become invested and knowledgeable about different struggles and come together in these kind of phenomena. I mean, some things that do encourage me. For example, just there's the odd phenomenon of, for example, people reacting against right-wing nationalists in the U.S. by posting memes from BTS, the Korean boy band, and that's another kind of online phenomenon. It's very transnational, I think. Just that this fandom, for example, and I think a lot just intersects with kind of online communities. But I think what's also is to be careful of is that in terms of online communities, it's not always representative of a place. For example, Twitter is not very widely used in Taiwan. Oftentimes, it is people that are more aware of English, for example, or want to be in touch with the internet discourse. There's rising use of Twitter because of concern about Facebook's desire to enter the Chinese market. And so whenever, there have been periodic incidents in which Facebook will suddenly start censoring mentions of Taiwanese political topics on Taiwanese Facebook, and that leads to kind of more people joining Twitter. But then it's still kind of a very select group of people. And I think that's also the case in Thailand, that a lot of the users of Twitter are, for example, more liberal or more educated and that sort of thing. And so this does not always represent just kind of the vast, the actual kind of society. It is a kind of select group of people. Oftentimes it is younger people. But I think then that this is a very promising start, looking at a phenomenon such as the Milk Tea Alliance, and just where it goes from here is something that I think is very worth considering as a question for those of us who are invested in democracy in the region and beyond. So I'll leave that there, and I'll be looking forward to talking later.
Thank you, Brian. That's a lot to unpack, but you discussed a lot of interesting topics, especially the impact of the shared culture of young people learning from each other, and also the challenges and risks that they face as they wage their campaigns, and about the impact of the transnational activism of activists across the region. I'm sure we'll have more about this to discuss in the open forum. So from Taiwan, we'll discuss the impact of the Milk Tea Alliance, not just in these communities, but also in Southeast Asia, outside Thailand. So from the Engaged Media Network, and Engaged Media has one very interesting project called Coconut. I think Darika will be able to discuss how netizens across Southeast Asia are viewing the Milk Tea Alliance. So Darika, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you for having me here. So after our speakings, speakers already discussed what happening in Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and then how they are supporting each other under a multi alliance. And although this network started off is quite small, of the group of the net citizen defending a Thai celebrity, as our speaker and now already mentioned. And then the hashtag has gone into a much bigger political movement. So I would like to discuss its impacts of Thai national youth movement in other Southeast Asia country, and then how they got the inspirations from the Thai protesters, and then how the way that the protester is very creative, and then they use a lot of tactic, and then what other Southeast Asia is already have some reflection on that. Because like what we have seen, I think they use a lot of interesting hashtag that like other speaker is already mentioned, tweet, memes, online posts, using like popular cultures as their digital activism. But thing is like it's very interesting because like many times when we have heard digital activism, many times it just stay online. Like echo chamber is not create any the offline actions or activism. But what we have seen the young activists connect to the multi-alliance like Thailand and Taiwan and Hong Kong, how they can translate and move the digital activism into the state protest. That is the one example that, I mean, for me, I think it's quite a rare moments of the regional solidarity that happened. And what we have seen, a simple hashtag, but it has gone to a much bigger movement as connecting like-minded activists in Asia. So besides Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and net citizens from other countries have also voiced their interest to support for the multi-alliance. And one of the example is in the Philippines. If you can see my slide as well. The Philippines, the multi-alliance Twitter account is already created, and many Filipinos have taken the social media to express their support for network and in solidarity with Thailand. And some of them discuss the issue about like South China Sea conflict and targeting the Chinese influence. And also they also refer to the one of the popular hashtag that mentioned on the social media during the Thai protest, which is what happening in Thailand. And this has been modified by the net citizens from other countries. And also what we have seen, the hashtag what happening in the Philippines began trending on the Twitters, and they amplify existing anti-government sentiment during the Duterte government, and the president just signed off the anti-terror law into effect. And the similar situation that the hashtag what happening in Indonesia is have been mentioned on the social media. In early October, like 10,000 of Indonesia took the street to the protest to the government. And a lot of discussion relate to the protest in Indonesia, and then how the Indonesian activists could learn from what happening in Thailand, and how the Thai activists have a lot of creative tactic, and also including in Hong Kong and Taiwan as well. And at the same time, one of the discussion that happening in Indonesia is like how Thai youth activists can ensure that the protest, it should be peaceful. Like no violation. But for me, what has surprised me the most during the what happening during the protest in Thailand is a hashtag, if I translate in English, like if Lao politics was good, began trending soon after the Thai net citizen used the hashtag in Thai, like ถ้าการเมืองดี or if politics was good. This is very interesting moment how they use the hashtag to voice our political opinion, and this is happen in the country where freedom of expression is very like limited, and the political landscape, if I say, is like very difficult to speak up. And what I have seen how young activists and then the net citizen connected to each other on social media began with the multi-alliance and make an impact on social movement in other countries, especially in Southeast Asia. And of course, some of them use the hashtag against the Chinese power in these regions. But more on that, they got inspired by the activists from other countries like to fight for democracy and the anti-authoritarian regimes. Because if we look at the political regime in many Southeast Asia countries, actually we have shared some political sentiments, and the young activists, who want to stand up and become a forefront of the protest, they feel this is enough. And a lot of the common word, what we have heard from the young activist movement from Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, the one word that they always mention, they want to have a better futures in their home country. So I think that I mean, for the young generation, that they use the social media to voice out their opinion and what they want their home country in a better situation. But as we know, I mean, protesting in the political regime is never easy. Even though the digital technology can help them, but at the same time, it can be used against them too. I mean, these pictures is a Thai protester in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He came to the protest with dressed up like a CCTV, but because a lot of the Thai protester, and I think that relate to the other Southeast Asia activists, we already know that being a pro-activist in the country like Thailand, I mean, the authority and the government is already have like a lot of the state surveillance and the tactics as well. And of course, that may open them up to certain threat, digital surveillance, and criminalizations. And especially for the online harassment, it has been increased a lot during the protests in Thailand. And many cases it has been connected to the state link social media, including the potential information operation. So in October, Twitter removed more than 900 Twitter accounts that connect to the loyal Thai army after the account was found that being engaging in the IO in Thai or information operation. But not just online, but what we have seen that in Thailand, they have been returned to prosecution for the less majest law, I mean in Thailand, to criminalize any threat to the monarchy. On top of the crackdown, the kinds of the media censorship is also increasing in the country. So the protesting in Thailand, of course, the international solidarity and support, that is very important. And one of the regional platforms that already mentioned is a COCONET. So the short for Connecting Community and Network. It's a network and the platform for a digital rights movement in Asia Pacific. So during the protest in Thailand, the COCONET member, including CSO, journalists, artists, and the filmmakers, call for the international support. And we had the online discussion how we can support and in solidarity with the pro-democracy protest. And we share a lot of the campaigning idea, but not just for the solidarity. We share our learning material like lesson learned, especially security material from the activists in Asia Pacific, how they can protect themselves during the protesting. That because I think at some point we have quite similar situation in terms of the authoritarian, and then how the activists can learn from each other to protect during the protesting. I think I will stop for now, and then we have some time to have Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Darika, for giving us an overview of how netizens across Southeast Asia are viewing the Milk Tea Alliance and the impact it made on countries like the Philippines and Laos. And also, you mentioned also what Brian said earlier about some of the risks faced by activists and netizens who are campaigning through the Milk Tea Alliance hashtag. So thank you once again to all our speakers, Anna, Oiwan, Brian, and Darika. We have several questions from our participants. Here's a question from Chavalin. Do you think the Milk Tea Alliance movement has a potential to go beyond online solidarity? So we have seen this movement as a symbolic movement, but not much in an actual fight against authorities. So perhaps Anna can first answer the question.
Okay. I think from what I've seen in the recent protests, I think it's already starting to come offline a little bit, in the sense that we've learned so much from each other, and especially from Hong Kong, and we are using the space of protest as a way of calling attention to issues that are happening in other countries. And I do hope that it gets further than that, because I think what Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwan share within this political struggle is that we are all fighting for democracy. So I do hope that the movement, that the Multi Alliance can become something that's more than online. But also I would like to say that I think online is good, because there is safety in numbers and there's safety in visibility, and when the authorities commit violence against the protesters, we would like that to be seen and known, and we need people to call attention to it. So spreading information online and trending hashtags in this age of the internet, I think there is some good in that.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Indeed, in Thailand, the Military Alliance in 2020 was not just an online phenomenon, because it saw young people mobilizing offline. And that's an offshoot of what the Military Alliance campaigned during the first part of the year. Anyway, for our next question, so I think either Anna or Darika can answer this, but you can choose to answer the impact of the Military Alliance in Thailand this year, not just specifically about the king, but the prospect of the Military Alliance in the pro-democracy movement this year. So the question is about if this protest will go on in Thailand, and if they will overcome, what do you think will be the impact of the monarchy? The question is from Twitch. I understand this is a sensitive topic.
Okay.
So I think you can
try.
You can try to answer perhaps the impact of the Military Alliance on the pro-democracy movement, which is unraveling now in Thailand, because you have here an active situation in Thailand.
Yes, I think this is a tough question, even for me as the Thai people, and then working on like a human rights issue in Thailand for how many years. But when I have seen for the young activists who really brave to speak up and then criticize the loyal family, and then I mean in the sense that they want to have a reform. I think the thing, and then another thing is like, if I mean for the question, if the protest is going on in Thailand and how it will be changed, of course it's not easy to change overnight, but I can say what I have seen like last year 2020, the whole generation, the perception toward the royal family, I mean in terms of the status of the monarchy, is already changed. Also, we might not see the concrete in terms of the political landscape, but in terms of the perception and awareness, I think it's already changed. Yeah, this is cancer. And Anna.
I think Darika has said it very well. I think so the Thai protesters have this slogan ให้มันจบที่รุ่นเรา which is let it end in our generation. But I think whether the issue is to do with the government or the monarchy or any other systemic issue that they are campaigning about, it is not going to change overnight. But the way the younger generation think and the way they see the world and how they deal with the culture it has changed and it's changing, and perhaps in 10 to 15 years you will see more concrete and clearer changes. And so specifically to do with the monarchy, I think the protesters are definitely hoping for a change. So what they are campaigning for reform, But as Darika mentioned in her presentation, we have the lèse-majesté law, section 112, which means that anyone who criticizes the monarchy can potentially go to jail, and a lot of activists who have spoken about monarchy reform are facing charges. So this is something that is difficult to discuss and to campaign about in Thailand, because there's always this threat of persecution. But they are trying. I think the protesters are trying, and they are certainly hoping that things are going to change.
Thank you, Darika and Anna. For the next question, we'll post it on screen. It's about, okay, I think Oiwan can answer this. We are mainly aware of the issues of Hong Kong, Taiwan, Uyghur, and Tibet, but are there other worries for the CCP within the country that most people don't know?
Actually, the CCP worries about everything. I mean, that's why it tried to repress everything. I mean, even Jack Ma, the billionaire behind Alibaba, he is a target of their worries. I mean, there are so many people who have, power elite in the past decade. It becomes, the worries for CCP. So the question is that for how long they will be tired of there being worries of everything.
Thank you, Oiwan. Next question. I think Brian can answer this. Do you think also include Philippines, Laos in the Milky Alliance? Or Brian or Darika can answer this. Does it mean that any country can join? What's the criteria or eligibility to be in this alliance? To be precise, I think the main actors in this movement are Hong Kong and Thailand.
Yeah, I think
well, this is an inclusive movement.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because one does see different definitions of what is included in the Milk Tea Alliance, and you do see people from other countries joining in, for example, just because personal interest or connection, family connection, or just they find out about this cause online and that sort of thing. And so I think the nice thing about the Milk Tea Alliance framing is that it can be expansive. And so I think that if you're concerned with democracy and these kind of shared values, it doesn't directly have to do with China either. I would say that. I think that people can actually be part of that. And so I think this is what's very interesting about this phenomenon. And so, in the memes that one does see, I think Taiwan, Thailand, and Hong Kong are kind of the main three. And I agree that Hong Kong and Thailand are actually the main ones here, the main actors. But I think it can expand, and that's also the nice thing about it. And so you do see this kind of flexible framing of it in the memes and production online of all this content as well. I think that in itself, the flexibility and permeability of it is also very interesting as a phenomenon.
Indeed, it is an alliance, but it doesn't really have a formal structure, It's an informal network, and you mentioned about the framing. It's really flexible. And Darika mentioned how activists and netizens outside Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Thailand are using the lens of the Milk Tea Alliance in raising their issues. Okay, so for the next question, I think we still have some questions. I think Brian or Oiwan can answer this. To what extent has the online war between the netizens of the Milk Tea Alliance and China's fandom nationalism contribute to a productive discussion and awareness about transnational regional issues?
I think one of the main awareness is about the China model. Yeah, because China, the character of China fandom nationalism is expedition to social media like Twitter and Facebook, which is outside China, and then their target are usually popular figure. So, like in Korea, it's BTS, in Thailand, it's right. And every time they have this kind of expedition, it's a kind of making the people in that country aware that once you have to enter the China market, you have to kind of submit to their logic, which is totally unreasonable. So in this sense, it really raised the transnational awareness and the alliance. I mean, apart from the share of value about democracy is actually very much about China as well, because the triggering point is their performance of Chinese nationalism outside of China. So and then this kind of bringing others together.
Thank you. Brian, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think what's very interesting is that when Chinese nationalists go and do this, it shows what the character of contemporary Chinese nationalism is. That there's this sensitivity that it is very easily, these egos are very easily bruised and will react in this way. And so that does educate, I think, other places, even places that are not as directly dealing with China as, say, Hong Kong or Taiwan, about that this is something, this is what the Chinese nationalism is like. And that's, again, as well mentioned, that's the price you pay to enter the Chinese market, this constant pattern of self-censorship. I also hope, though, that it can allow for education about very country-specific issues. Also, in terms of the phenomena, I think maybe that in terms of the information sharing, memes are a great way to share information, but sometimes they're not very dense. I mean, you can kind of like unpack it and get to different layers, but sometimes it can be a little light. But what is interesting then, I think, is point to the different shared patterns between, let's say, authoritarian regimes in the region. And that's, I think, something people can learn about. That, at the same time, you see national security laws being passed across Asia, or that the rhetoric from different authoritarian regimes is actually very similar to each other. And I think that in itself is quite interesting and I think educational for people.
Thank you. For the next question, I think Anna or Darika can answer this. Considering the COVID pandemic, do you think that the Milk Tea Alliance has made activism more accessible to individuals despite external constraints? Will digital activism remain prominent post-COVID?
For this issue, I have a bit of maybe it's a question that we can all think about when you think about protest, which is that there are always going to be people who support the movement who cannot join the physical protest for whatever reasons, such as people with disabilities. If you use a wheelchair, you will not be able to access a lot of protest sites in Bangkok. And I think this is something that we might want to think about when you think of protest and digital activism, in that you cannot place all the values of a movement onto going out onto the street, because I would say that the internet and social media is also a very important front line that we have to fight on.
Okay, thank you. Darika, you have something to add?
Yes, I think I agree what Anna is already mentioned, and also I think not just only what I have seen among especially for Hong Kong and Thai activists, not just they mobilize on the social media like Twitter, but they already have a Telegram group that they want to talk each other, how they want to have a strategy on the protest, both offline and online. I think that's why it's make a movement, the student movement is become bigger and bigger. And also relate to the COVID. I think in Thailand, the one thing is we are not locked down, and that's why the government it's tricky, because the government is still use the emergency decrees to say that it is a COVID, but at the same time, it's want to prevent the protest on the street as well. I think it's tricky, but of course, after COVID, I still believe that the protest is still, it's become bigger and bigger. But the COVID situation might make the people is more angry how the government handle the situation.
I think based on the answers of Anna and Darika, that deserves another webinar. The COVID, post-COVID activism. Anyway, for our last question, sorry, we lack the time already. We have a question from Tan. Would China invest more in their information operations, such as using more trolls and use their news service for the positive image of CCP, TV press? I think Oiwan can answer this.
They always use the tactics. I mean, they to promote a positive Chinese image to news service. But sometimes their tactic they use within mainland China does not work outside. Yeah, and then that's something that they are still adjusting. So like using of troll, I think the troll has totally failed in some way. And now, because there's so much trouble, domestic trouble, so I don't know, their control inside China will be, it's always promoting positive narrative on China and negative narrative about all other countries. So, yeah. Please.
Okay, thank you, Oiwan. Now, there's one question which was posted in our chats. I think this one is for Brian. Do you think that the alliance should adapt a more centralized organizational model for greater tangible impact? You mentioned earlier about the flexibility of the framing of the campaign.
Yeah, I think the flexibility is key because I think that is the strength of it. There's not a very high barrier for entry, that anyone can do this. Online, it's also anonymous, so you don't actually have to fear retribution as much, though it's still possible to track you. I also don't think it's actually possible to really adopt a more centralized model because it's so vast and widespread and so forth. But I think that to have a more tangible impact, because a lot of questions have touched on, for example, how to take an online phenomenon offline. Maybe one way about it is think about actions that could be taken. Let's say global actions on, coordinated actions in that sense. And it probably have to have some kind of open framing, like an event, and people do something. And so that could take the form of like a solidarity rally or something of that sort. You do have global solidarity rallies very often for causes. But I think also what's interesting to think about is how do you actually pressure, I think, regimes. Regimes often have international interests, for example, financial holdings in other places. So having coordinated actions that are across different countries can actually have a impact in that sense. And so I think that's something that's very interesting to think about. But I don't know if the milk tea phenomenon has really got to that stage of thinking it and adopting that kind of tactical consideration. I wonder what will actually kind of take to get there.
Okay, so thank you, Anna, Oiwan, Brian, Darika. Different flavors, all milk tea. Different models, all for democracy. So let's all drink to democracy. To all our participants who watch our webinar, please visit the Global Voices website through globalvoices.org. Read the coverage of events and topics from around the world in over 30 languages. From the site, you will be able to sign up and receive our daily and weekly newsletters. And please follow us on Twitter at Global Voices and also on Facebook and YouTube. Once again, this is Mong Palatino from Manila, Philippines, thanking everyone for your participation in our Global Voices Insights webinar. Bye.